where the scapegoat child finds it possible to exist. Do you find it impossible to envision a successful future for yourself? Does it seem emotionally impossible to be close to someone where both of you are at your best? And have you had to abandon important goals because it felt necessary, but you were not sure why? Well, we can often take for granted the notion that we exist. The scapegoat child, though, does not have this luxury. They are not seen as who they actually are by their narcissistic parent. Instead, this parent has their own pathological reasons to see this child as defective and undeserving. Worse yet, the child depends on this parent to know that they exist. The blessing and curse of consciousness for humans is that we have to be encouraged to exist by our parents. This is great when the parent is well adjusted enough to see the child as that child actually is, but it's not great for the scapegoat child to a narcissistic parent. When this child tries to be who they actually are, the child can feel non-existent. The only way to exist is to be who their parent sees. This will have to mean adopting the identity that they are defective and undeserving too. Otherwise, the child does not have any existential footing to stand on. And I cannot overemphasize how necessary it is for the scapegoat child to find a way to exist with their narcissistic parent. In today's video, I address why the scapegoat child and survivor may only feel real when they feel bad. The child had to find a way to exist with a parent who insisted they were bad. Now that child must avoid experiences and outcomes that reflect their goodness. The scapegoat survivor may wonder why they have had to abandon or thwart progress towards important life goals. They may often blame themselves for messing things up. Well, I hope that after watching this, you will understand why this was the only way to keep existing at the time. And my hope is that this understanding can yield compassion towards yourself and be a step towards seeing yourself as you actually are. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in helping adult scapegoat survivors of narcissistic parents find compassion, protection, and freedom for themselves today. And if you go to my website, jreedtherapy.com, you can find a lot of resources to help with the process of recovery from this form of abuse. And I'm also pleased to announce that I just released a second book on recovery from narcissistic abuse for scapegoats, and it's called How Scapegoats Can Heal from Narcissistic Abuse: 3 Steps Towards Compassion, Protection, and Freedom. And this book lays out 3 steps to finally make it safe to feel good about yourself. First, you'll find compassion for yourself by making sense of what happened. Second, you'll protect yourself by moving away from narcissistic abusers and towards safe people. And third, you'll discover freedom by defying the rules of your narcissistic parent. Most importantly, you'll learn how to overcome obstacles in order to put these steps into action. This book picks up where my earlier first book left off, and that book was called Growing Up as the Scapegoat to Narcissistic Parents: A Guide to Healing. So if you found that book helpful, then I'm confident you'll find this one to be too. And you can find it on Amazon, and the link will be at the top of the comments section in this video. The importance of existence. Well, why is it so important to know we exist? It's hard to answer this question with words, but I'll try. The fact is that if we are breathing on this planet, then we exist. But our minds need another person to feel confident in this fact. As children, we seek out a basis for existence in how our parents find us in their minds. Of course, no child can actually read their parents' mind. They deduce their existence from the parents' responses to them. If the parent's presence is patient and nurturing while curious about the child's independent experience, then that child may find existence to mean being who they actually are. The parent does not require that child to be who they are not in order to validate that child's existence. The scapegoat child's inner experience goes largely ignored by their narcissistic parent. They are responded to as if they are there to serve the parent's needs exclusively. So this child, as they actually are, is not granted legitimacy. No parent is curious and respectful of the child's independent existence. So where can the child find a way to exist? Instead of being provided with what they need, the scapegoat child is saddled with the feelings of worthlessness that their parent cannot handle. A narcissistic parent has to relocate their core sense of worthlessness into their scapegoat child. Next, they deprive, devalue, and control that child so that the only way to exist is to be and feel worthless. The child is offered a way to feel real, sort of, so long as they feel bad. Now, the child does exist in the parent's eyes. The problem is that this way of existing does not reflect who the child actually is. Existing requires the child persist the lie that they are the worst. This way of existing beats non-existence, but stands on very shaky psychological ground. The child must continually renew their commitment to being the bad one in order to prop up this fragile sense of existing. Well, let's look at an anonymized case example to illustrate. Darren's child was marked by inner confusion. From the get-go, his mother did not see him for him. If he was playing with blocks as a toddler, she would not sit next to him to unintrusively show curiosity. If he colored on a piece of paper and showed it to her, she'd pay no attention. When she did pay attention to Darren, it was to show him off to friends and neighbors. If one of these folks paid a visit to their home, she would find Darren, pick him up, and put him on her lap. She held him tightly, and Darren felt an immediate impulse to squirm that somehow he knew he had to override. He had to find a way to sit there as she required, or else. Of course, at the time, he could not know what that or else was, but he knew it was bad. And then once these visits from friends and neighbors were over, his mother would go back to ignoring Darren. So he learned that the only way to exist with his mother was to submit to her control. And this meant that he had to exist as someone who does not deserve respect for his own autonomy. If Darren tried to make a decision for himself, it felt like he would cease to exist. His mother only acknowledged his existence when he was useful to her. How the adult scapegoat survivor may keep existing in the only way they know how. A scapegoat child brought up to feel like they only exist when they are useful to their parent can find it impossible to thrive. Existence has meant submitting to the authority of another, or it may have meant feeling inferior to others. As they enter adulthood, they now have chances to make decisions about what they want. It may seem simple, but their own desires and standing have lived in the bucket of non-existence. In my work with scapegoat survivors, they may have had to abandon certain life goals at one point or another in their lives. And they can often be confused about why they did this or this happened. And they may explain this to themselves as yet another example of their supposed ineptitude. Though convincing, I emphatically argue that that is not the case. The scapegoat child and later adolescent may find a way to exist in the only way they can while also pursuing a goal. And this can mean pursuing the goal in ways that feel arduous, joyless, and compulsive. Life can feel like it will only be worth living when they reach this goal. And this all corresponds to existing as the defective one that their parent may insist they be. The genius in this approach, though, is that they now have a way to move towards something seemingly better in life. This state of being better must always be promised, though, and never delivered. So let's go back to Darren to see more. When Darren got to high school, he initially did not do well in his classes. He had an inner sense of desolation that made such matters seem meaningless. Then his mother started looking at his report cards and expressing disgust at the grades he was bringing home. She'd say, "Come on, Darren, what is this? You are not going to get into college if you keep this up, and I'm not going to support you if you don't. You better figure something out and bring home better grades next time." Darren felt searingly inadequate at her criticism, but he resolved to start studying hard. He withdrew from his friends and committed to doing homework for 3 hours every weeknight. As he was doing this, he felt an intoxicating sense of purpose. His every waking moment became about getting into a good college. On the weekends, he would pore over books about different universities, and he'd tell himself, oh man, if you get your grades up, you could go here or there. The promise of being able to go to a good college felt like salvation waiting for him. He just had to deliver the grades. Well, eventually, Darren did make it into a well-regarded college. And when he got to campus, he did not know how to have fun with his classmates. He thought he was being indulgent and not serious enough if he did not study all day on weekends. He told himself that he wanted to become a professor of English and then studied accordingly to get into a graduate school. So the rest of his undergraduate years were pointed towards gaining admission to a well-regarded graduate program in English literature. He told himself that life would finally be what he wanted if he could only get in to this program. He would not know what to do with himself if he was not thinking about grad school or studying towards the goal of getting in. Well, Darren succeeded in gaining admission and found himself in crisis to his dismay. As he started attending his graduate classes on topics that he thought he would find really interesting, he felt wayward, as if he suddenly had no direction in his life. His classes wanted him to form his own opinions about the works that they were reading, and grades no longer mattered in these classes. Students in the program were given the opportunity to learn material because it was what they were passionate about. Darren found himself bereft of passion for literature now. He could not envision a way for him to pick a direction in the field and build a career around that topic. It wasn't just difficult either. Darren literally could not see himself in the future doing this. Something very strong inside him screamed, "Stop," as he was participating in the program. Then fairly quickly, the subject he thought he loved began to feel like a discipline that was for others, not for him. This turn in Darren's internal experience of the program had external consequences. Try as he might, he could not keep his eyes open in seminars. His classmates would nudge him to wake up, but the instructors noticed. He began turning in assignments late. He could not concentrate on the thesis project he had to complete by the end of his first year. And in his annual performance review with his advisor, he was informed that they were putting him on academic probation. If he did not improve his performance in the next semester, they were going to ask him to leave. So Darren decided not to wait around for this humiliation. He told himself that literature was just not for him, and he began looking for jobs in the legal field where he could make a living and not be called upon to know and pursue his own ideas. Darren's manner of existing fell apart once he had made it to grad school. Once there, he had to make decisions on his own behalf, and that felt too alien to him. Doing so would have landed him in that place of non-existence he had to avoid at all costs. He had to orchestrate a way to exit the program, or he would have left the only existence he had at the time. Finding compassion for yourself for solving the existence problem. Showing yourself compassionate understanding for how you had to navigate such existence-threatening success gets to the heart of what it means to recover from this form of abuse. The scapegoat survivor did exactly what they had to do on the inside in order to survive. Yet from the outside, it could look like they were just screwing up again. Growing up, the scapegoat child had to prioritize the outside view of themselves. This was what let them know that they exist. The scapegoat child likely had to form an unconscious belief that they were defective in order to go on existing with their parent. Doing so would have gratified their parents' need to have their own sense of defectiveness show up in someone else. And then that would have helped the child by then increasing the parents' motivation to be involved with them. In essence, this unconscious belief would allow there to be something in it for the parent to engage with the child. The scapegoat survivor's assessment that avoiding success was another way they screwed up can go along with this unconscious belief. The choice of how to interpret this type of event in your life can be an opportunity to defy this type of belief. So how does one make the inside version of what happened matter more than the outside version? By forming new relationships where it's safe to say what life feels like on the inside. And by safe to say, I mean that the other person shows you respect and care for your feelings as you state them. This is instead of judging you for what you supposedly should or should not have done. And as you get to speak and be listened to in this manner, the validity of what you had to do to survive can increase. Now it is not just you in private who knew you had no other choice but to deviate from the path to success earlier. Someone else who is trustworthy now also knows this. And as a result, this version of what happened can grow to feel more and more real. Again, let's go back to Darren to illustrate. So he left grad school and worked as a legal researcher for about a year. His life consisted of doing his work, working out afterwards, and coming home to have dinner and watch TV before bed. On weekends, he would immerse himself in movies or socialize with friends who he found to be sort of always on the go. He appreciated these friends, but did not feel like they knew each other very well. So Darren was leading a functional but lonely life, and he still held the fact that he had left grad school against himself. He decided to find a therapist to talk about this. In their work together, he would express how disappointed in himself he was for leaving grad school. His therapist noted that the label of screw up did not fit her experience of Darren at all. He seemed very conscientious and motivated to her. She suspected that something else got in the way of him fulfilling his ambition to become a professor of English. She said, I get that you blame yourself for the challenges you faced in grad school and then deciding to leave, but I want to know more about what it was like for you when you would try to study or work on assignments. Darren was surprised that someone wanted to know more about his experience of events that happened rather than their own interpretation of those events. He thought to himself, maybe my version of what happened could actually matter in here. He then explained how hard it was for him to envision a future for himself in the field and how pursuing his doctorate degree grew to seem meaningless. His therapist said, it sounds like what happened in grad school had nothing to do with your ability. Rather, from what you're describing, it sounds like something within signaled that you better not proceed with the program. One way or another, it just felt too psychologically dangerous to do so. Well, Darren sighed with relief. His worry that this person would also judge him instead of understand him was alleviated for the moment. His therapist went on to say, I think an important part of our work together will be for us to understand more about that sense of danger you felt as you got closer to realizing an ambition for yourself. Well, if this topic of having to sort of abandon an important goal in your own life resonates, then I hope you found today's explanation of how and why this can come about to be useful, because it can be such a sometimes searing condemnation of oneself when these types of events happen for not sort of, quote, doing it better or doing it right, however that can feel defined. And with that, I thank you for tuning in and look forward to posting again next Friday. And as always, want to thank everyone for your continued support and engagement with this YouTube channel and the resources that surround it. And yeah, again, it's always incredible to read the comments, you know, and sort of know that the experiences talked about in the videos and shared in the comments section are not unique, that there's a shared basis for them. And I think that really combats one of the worst parts about growing up as a scapegoat child, which is the isolation and sense that you are the only one. Okay, well, with all that, I will see you all next week. Take care.